Okay, good morning. I have posted, actually Ida has posted my text on the website already. So I will not read it because I think it's there for everybody to look at anyway. And I'm using some quotes as well, so it's kind of hard to read in a lively way what I've done. But just to recapitulate what I have said so far in the text about the term that Mukka is proposing for the discussion about geopolitics. Firstly, we would like to point out that geopolitics is not an unproblematic field and not an unproblematic term. It tends to absorb you by its level of abstraction. It's very seductive because it is as I put it here, it's insisting that the map is the territory. And we all know that that cannot be true. You know, we know from our own life experience that, in fact, the map is not the territory. But we get absorbed by this this mode of thinking when we engage in geopolitics, and that happens every time we read a newspaper. It happens when we discuss these things. That the theme itself sort of is seductive enough to make us believe what we know is not true. And geopolitics also tends to be cruel because it tends to really not take into account the situation on the ground, as it were. And I think that's also why Mabel proposed that we have a look at concretely what's happening now to the people who are moving. And I also understand that the term needs discussion, as Galit said. I mean, I'm just going to tell you what the Swedish newspaper wrote the other day. In a typical example, it's a typical example of how unconscious we are of the terms that we're using. They said the roads of the Balkans are full of refugees and other migrants. You know, and it just shows you the confusion of terminology that we have to live with at this point. I'm also going to show a little film later, 4 minutes, that in a certain sense connects, at least to my understanding, what I'm saying now with the term that we are elaborating for the glossary, which is eurasia. And eurasia is a very difficult thing to move into. Our justification for doing so as a museum, because it's not something we have invented for the discussions here, it's something that we have been saying for a number of years, that we want to be a Eurasian museum in the way we collect, and also to some extent in the program that we propose through exhibitions. The reason we risk doing this, we are well aware that the term Eurasia has been more often than not kidnapped by people who are in one sense or another in power in Russia and in countries closely affiliated with Russia, such as Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is probably a case in point when you want to study how Eurasia is being used now. It pretty much sums up the official ideology of Kazakhstan to say that we are a Eurasian country. And Eurasian is used a lot in Kazakhstan as a sort of, for them, positive identity marker. They're also using another term which is more esoteric still, Turanian, and it might take us a little bit too far to explain exactly what it means, but Turanian is to do with the Turkic world, the world that speaks Turkic languages, but it's actually an Iranian word, I think. There's an opera by Puccini, Turandot, and actually Turandot means the daughter of Turan in Persian. And it's used in Kazakhstan in reference to the Eurasianist movement, which I'm talking a little bit about in my text. The most interesting and important member of the Eurasianist movement was a linguist, Nikolai Trubetskoy, whom I knew because I'm trained in linguistics. I knew him as a phonologist, as one of the founders of the Structural School of Linguistics, a member of the Prague Circle, and the author of a very interesting way of looking at relationships between languages that he called the Sprachbund theory. And the Sprachbund theory says that languages that are not genetically affiliated with each other may still be very closely linked and may still affect each other very strongly. And of course, the probably most illustrative example of this is also something that relates very closely to Eurasia. It is the position of the three leading Finno-Ugrian languages in Europe, Finnish, Estonian, and Hungarian. They are the only Finno-Ugrian languages that have achieved the status of being associated with a nation state, whereas the other Finno-Ugrian languages, some of which are actually spoken by more people than these three, have not done that. But all three of these languages are in a very close double bind with a Germanic language. So, for instance, Swedish and Finnish are not genetically related, but you express pretty much the same thoughts in both languages because they have been connected for so long in one state. Hungarian and German, Estonian and German have similar relationships. So in terms of translation, we're here looking at a case of mirror translation. It's called mirror translation because it's basically saying exactly the same things with exactly the same words, only the words come from different genetic origins. But the model of thinking is basically just mirroring. One language is mirroring the other because they have been connected for so long politically, socially, culturally. And this, I think, is a way of understanding what Sprachbund theory talks about. It's actually something that Trubetskoy proposed in order to counteract the Blut und Boden aspects of Eurasianism, in a way. But as I say, I wasn't even aware of the fact that he, in parallel to his internationally visible career as a linguist, was also involved in this geopolitical cultural movement run by emigre Russian intellectuals in the 20s, based first in Sofia because he was there, and then moving to Prague and other places in Europe. It existed in the 20s, it sort of petered out in the 30s, and it was infiltrated also by intellectuals from the Soviet Union. It's a long and interesting story that the director of MUCA, Barte, has sort of revisited in connection with this year's Moscow Biennial. And that's basically why we found it, or I found it important and interesting to bring up Eurasia here, because of its connection to this edition of the Moscow Biennial. You can read more about it in the text. And also, coming back to why we're using it in our museum, there are alternative ways of using the concept of Eurasia that comes from artists, Joseph Beuys and Jimmy Durham. And Joseph Beuys and Jimmy Durham have both used Eurasia in alternative ways that we find more productive, particularly Jimmy Durham, because Jimmy Durham is using it in order to dilute the importance of Europe on the world stage. He says Europe is nothing but a little appendix on the continent of Eurasia. And you have always to look at Europe within a larger context. So that is a productive way to think Eurasia for us. We have also been thinking Eurasia not only in discourse and not only in projects such as the Moscow Biennial, but also in our collection. And I just wanted to very briefly show some illustrations of what I'm talking about. MUCA has, as one of not very many museums in Western Europe, a collection of contemporary art from Central Asia, from the republics that used to be Soviet republics in Central Asia. We're mostly talking about Kazakhstan again, but also Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan. Now, there are some, just to show you some examples. Hopefully it works, maybe it doesn't. Diapositive 1.8. Nasljedny, maybe that's the following one. Yes, it still doesn't work. Okay, maybe I cannot. Yes, of course. That's what I'm trying to do.
Okay, so
Okay.
yeah, here or there.
I think that this morning I got a new proposal.
Okay. Right. Rustam, we have work by several artists from Central Asia, but I'm just going to show you a couple. Rustam Khalfin, who was actually not Kazakh, he was Tatar, but an artist who lived and worked in Kazakhstan for most of his life. He, in the 90s, he was a painter, and in the 90s he discovered that he could use productively the ideas formulated by Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari in Mille Plateaux on the nomadism. They are formulating, as you know, ideas about the war machine, nomadism, and interpreting politics through prehistory, through unwritten history, in ways that he thought that he could, I think, in a way, explore and exploit in his work. So he did, and the objects that you see on the wall his name for these objects is pulota, and pulota is actually something that refers to the shape that you are left with when you take clay or dough in your hand and squeeze it, and the in-between space between your fingers that leave an imprint on this material. And that is something that is a trope in nomadic culture, in the culture of Central Asia. And he started with these negative, positive, inverted forms and shapes to create objects and situations and actions and performances involving these activities. But then it sort of evolved into a series of sculptural shapes, and these puloti that we see on the wall here, accompanying the video that he made with his wife Yulia Tikhonova, called Northern Barbarians. And I think you see what it's about. They are actually not made of clay, but of plywood. But they are exploring the formal characteristics of this conjunction of action and material that is summed up in the term of pulota, which again was something that he connected to nomadism. Let's hope, no, it doesn't work. The other one? Sorry, Ida, I don't know if it's only me or if it's actually the system. Yes. Yeah, but if I am notoriously bad with these things. Okay, the next one.
You just click twice. You just click twice through.
Twice? Double click.
So you see.
Okay. And the other artist that I wanted just for you to see is also a Kazakh artist. Well, actually not Kazakh. He's more Russian ethnic, but also connected to Kazakhstan, Sergei Maslov. And we have in our collection some works by him. And the reason we have these things in our collection, I should say, is that we had a collaboration with Victor Misiano, the Moscow-based curator, who curated the first Central Asian pavilion at the Venice Biennial in 2005, and was subsequently invited to do a series of exhibitions at our museum. And in connection with this series, which was called Europe at Large, we managed to acquire some of these works. The project by Maslov, which has lent its name to a website in Kazakhstan, presenting artists from this area, is Astral Nomads. And he actually got a grant from the Soros Foundation to write a novel about Central Asian nomads in space, connecting them to the Soviet space program, which of course also already was connected to Kazakhstan with a firing range at Baikonur. And the original mode of presentation of this project was a computer screen in a yurt. We also have a series of paintings. Now I get it. By Maslov, called Dreams. And they all show this face of the dreaming person and the things that the dreaming person is envisaging. As you can see, some of these things are quite explicit. He, as an artist, quite often got into trouble for being too explicit in his imagery and in his actions. No. Sorry. Okay. This is dream number 29. He was also, as a painter, playing with particular styles of realist kitsch that are popular in Eurasia, not least in Moscow, in Russia. Sorry. No, it's fine. And this is just to show you how we have exhibited Maslow's work in the overview of our collection that we presented in 2013. And finally, we have the artist Bedolla, originally from Azerbaijan, although from a Persian-speaking family, and he connects, not only is he from the area that can be credibly described as Eurasian, but he's also working very much on themes that are to do with migration and the language of people who are displaced and the displacement of their language. And it's something, incorrect language, if you like, hybridized language. So this is a project called War is Over, or War is Over, that consists of this book and also a large installation. And it's a theme that he's been working on quite a lot.